Welcome to Psychically Tapping into Houses, Part 5, and this one got a little crazy. Okay, so I was on my way home from hot yoga yesterday, none other than hot yoga, and as I'm driving, I swear it's always when I'm driving in this city, I see like a lot of energy to my left. Something calls me, and there's like a lot of children-like energy, and spirits know that I have a soft spot for children energy, so I will stop and open up to them quicker than other spirits. It's just something that I can't help. Okay, so as always, I wrote it down like vocally in my notes app, and then came home and wrote it down, and then did some Googling. Turns out that there's a notorious orphanage right where I was that it had moved. So this isn't the original building, and I kind of got the sense of that. In Denver, very haunted. So it never ceases to amaze me, this entire spiritual world. I love this. So I wrote down on my notes, at first there was a little girl, one little girl that had stepped forward, and then there was a group of them. And one of the first things they showed me was that they had one bike that they had to share, and that like it was like notorious, like one or two bikes, and it was like a source of fighting, and that there just wasn't enough to go around. Now this was like, apparently it had opened in the 1800s. This was around a lot of the energy that was in it. I don't see a lot of, or the modern day energies didn't step forward. However, it did move, so I'm not entirely sure. But that there wasn't, like at the time that it was built, there wasn't a crazy amount around. So one of the big things that I felt was my skin started to feel hot. I started to feel very anxious. And there was definitely a fire energy, which once looked up, notorious fire, which still is so cool to me. I mean, not cool, but you know what I mean. So there was one little girl who couldn't go outside, and I literally, one of the first things I saw was just her looking through this, I said second or third story window, and it's like she's looking out at the world, desperate to get out there, but couldn't. At first I thought maybe she was paraplegic and they didn't have like a lot of what they needed to house somebody in that way, because it was so long ago and they were very, it looks like, underfunded. However, I realized that once I researched about it, there was a fire on the third floor, and people from the third floor were locked in their rooms, children, people who had worked there, and they couldn't get out. They could look out the window, but they couldn't get out. And one of the little girls, I literally saw her last experience just looking through the window, and that desperation came from that there was a literal fire around and confusion, which broke my heart. So I tried to give a little love. I also want to say it was interesting because a lot of these souls aren't stuck there. It was like I was seeing the memories of the energy of the house, and like the energy of the theme of the orphanage in general, which is very interesting, and I don't fully understand it, but I also don't think a lot of these souls are stuck there, so to speak. But there's like a memory around the energy of it that like comes forward. Apparently there are a lot of sightings and things. There's a lot of trauma stuck within, but I don't know if it's necessarily like a spirit or not, which is very interesting. I also kept seeing like a wall, a broken wall. I wasn't entirely sure what that meant, and somebody kept saying it controlled me. I also don't know what that means. At this point with the little girl, I felt like she had given me a kiss on my forehead. I'm not entirely sure why, but my entire forehead and crown was tingling, and it was the most like serene and sweet energy I've ever felt. But there, again, I kept seeing a lot of energies of spirit saying there wasn't enough, and that they were kind of left to their own devices, but at the same time incredibly strict. Whereas if you stepped out of any line, there was like a physical energy around it, and they would get hit, they would do these things, which might be a sign of the times, or might have been maybe the people working there shouldn't have been working with children. I always want to say that, but I also know that there is just things that were normalized back then that shouldn't have been. They weren't allowed to talk about anything. So like after the fire, when they had moved, there was a lot of trauma with the other kids around losing friends, around being around that energy, around having to see that like fire and all of that going on, and that like if you even brought it up, you would be hit, like you weren't allowed to talk about it. There was a lot of like really negative energy around that. And again, it was mostly children, and I saw a lot of children just fighting for attention, fighting for resources. But there was one older woman that stepped forward who seemed gentle and attentive, but like kind of confused. She had like brown longish hair and presented a lot in white, but then would go into black. So like white and black kind of reminded me of like a maid-like uniform, but that she'd always kind of wanted more for herself. So I don't know if there was a love interest that she had wanted, but she kept like manifesting in white and then would go back to this maid-like uniform, which was very interesting. So I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, that's what came forward. It was very interesting. Now, the thing about this was after I channeled this at home and started writing my notes, I started to get this really uncomfortable feeling. So I cleansed a little bit of myself. As soon as I cleansed it, my sweet, innocent wife sitting on the other side of the couch said, "What did you just bring in here?" I can't breathe, I don't feel comfy. And then I ended up having to cleanse her and like intuitively feeling like I needed to, because it was something around connecting to this energy. It was like tightness in the throat, can't breathe, heavy energy. So giving a little bit of love to that building, but this is what came forward for it. So I wanted to share.